options for really whatever you want to do, right? And there's a lot of keyboard shortcuts as well. So if you're a big shortcut person, I haven't memorized all these, but there's a ton of them. So that can save you some time too if you're working on these notebooks every day. All right, let me go back into this demo. I just realized I breezed through that top part, so I wanted to touch on it. All right, so moving forward with data exploration, right? We're going to play around with this Diamond CSV set, data set, and I'll just show you some of the things that you can do with Databricks and some of the real power of this tool, right? So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data frame of this Diamond CSV file. I'm going to maintain the headers and schemas from the file, and I'm going to do a transformation on it, right? So here, I'm just going to create a path to this file just to make things easier when I create this data frame, right? And this essentially is like a virtual table of this file. And so I'm going to read in the CSV file, like I said, keep the header and the schema, and then load in the path. So when I ran that, you can see that it printed out the schema, and I created this data frame, right? If I wanted to do like a count command, I can count the amount of elements in the data frame, and then you can see there's 53,940 elements or rows, so it's pretty sizable, but not massive. If I do a display command, you can see here that it'll print out the data frame contents. So basically the column headers. This is just a subset of the data, right? So if you have a really large data sets, I think it maxes out at about 1 million rows. So you're not going to be able to download more than like 1 million rows or see like more than 1 million rows in a tabular format in the UI. And then one other option too is if you hit this plus sign right after I did like a display command, you can create visualizations that'll show you what those look like, or you can view the data profiles for your data frame, right? So I actually already created one to save some time. And you can see here what that did for me. So you can see here, you still have all the column headers in the schema. You see some really interesting details about the columns and the types of data that you have, right? And this could also be really useful if you're a data scientist, right? So for example, you can see that I have 8 numerical features here and 3 categorical features, right? So if I was trying to convert everything to a numerical value to do some data science or machine learning, I would know I needed to use maybe something like a one-hot encoder for these variables, right? You can see here a count for each one of these columns and some other values, right? Like the mean, the standard deviation, the min, median, and max, as well as the data type. So even if it's numerical, it'll tell you if it's an int, if it's a double. I believe this will also work for dates as well. So if something's in the date format, it'll show up here as a date. So that's pretty cool. So I just wanted to quickly show that. And then let's keep going here because let's see where I left off. Yeah, so I just displayed this Diamonds data frame, but I have this in memory, right, as a data frame, right? So that CSV file stored as a data frame. So let's keep going. So now I created this visualization, right? So you can just do that by hitting this plus sign and then hitting visualization. So I've already done that. You can see here, what I've done here is I am grouping the different clarity of different cuts of diamonds and then comparing those by price, right? So if I hit edit visualization, you can actually drag and drop and change things too. So I've already created this. I'm just messing around, but I'm just trying to show you like how it's easy to manipulate and create visualizations. You can aggregate in different values. There's different types of charts that you can do. I'm just trying to show you what the art of the possible here. You know, if you wanted to group or stack things, all those options are available to you. So now we're going to get into a temporary view real quick. So I'm going to show you some of the power of doing things in SQL and how that can interact with Python and creating a temporary view. So sometimes if you have a really large data set and you want to test out some quick transformations, you know, creating a temporary view might allow you to do things quickly, as opposed to like having to store something in like a data frame or memory or things like that. All right, so here I'm going to create a temporary view called Diamonds table, and I'll show you some things that I'm going to do with that later. But also you can create tables as well, right? So you can create tables of files and store those in Databricks. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to store that in our storage system, which is mounted to S3, right? So I'm going to create this table. It does exist, called Diamonds, using CSV. And very similar way of creating the data frame that I created here, right? That I created right here. I'm going a little fast. But now I'm doing this in SQL, right? And you'll notice, right, because I had the SQL magic command, I'm able to do this in SQL. And you can see here, similarly, if I click down, you know, I guess it'll show me the it'll show me the schema if I click this. Sorry. So I guess it doesn't show you the schema for whatever reason when you create the table, but then if you do a select star from command, it'll give you, you know, the data types and the schema information. And then similarly, right, if you do a select star from command, you can see that you get the column headers and some of the sample values for the different rows in the columns for this table. So it looks pretty similar to what we did with the data frame. The cool thing, right, is this is a Python notebook, but I was able to do SQL and Python in the notebook. And also, if you if you don't have like a big data science background, but you have a good SQL background, well, if you know SQL, you know Spark. So you can do these SQL commands. We support like I think ANSI SQL now, so it's like pretty similar to anything if you learned like MySQL databases or anything like that in college, right, or wherever. So here you can also do like filtering and things like that. SQL makes it really easy to do that. So I prefer when I'm doing filtering, I use SQL personally. So here, right, I'm going to do a select star, which is all the rows and columns from the diamonds table where this cut equals fair, right? And you'll see here, we've successfully filtered this data set and we're only getting the cut for fair. So maybe if you were working with claims data, for example, at CMS, right, and you had different states, you could do select star from states where the state equaled, California, just an example. Cool. And then, like describe command, that also gives you some of the schema information that you saw earlier when you displayed the data frame. You can see that same information with the describe command. So all that regular SQL syntax is all possible within Databricks, natively in Spark. Similarly, like select distinct, right? If I wanted to see the different cuts of diamonds, you can see that I've done that here for the diamonds table, and you can see that there's 5 different cuts of diamonds in this table. Widgets, right? So you probably have noticed this hanging drop-down list up at the top. So widgets are a way of parameterizing variables in code, right? So you don't have to constantly manually edit values. So what do I mean by that? So for this diamonds data set, for example, you have 5 different cuts of diamonds. Well, maybe if I had like 30 different lines of code and if I hard coded in premium, then I would have to go in and switch those same lines of code to be ideal or good or fair, etc. Right? So you can see here, I just have it equal to cut. So it's dynamic, and no matter what this drop-down value is, Spark will be able to read it, and you won't have to manually change your code. So here in this example, I only have like 1 line of code where I'm calling the cut variable. But let's say you were working with states, right? Well, there's 50 states. Maybe you had like 100 lines of code that each reference a state. You could set them all equal to California, but then every time you had to run this pipeline or this notebook for a different state, you'd have to manually go in and change it 50 times. So if you create a widget, you have a drop down of 50 different states. All you would have to do is set, the argument may be equal to state if that's the name you gave it, and then you would just come to this drop down and you would just click that different drop down item and then run that notebook for that state. So it's a really easy way of reducing errors, but also a quicker way of iterating through a list of variables for a data set. And this will tie in nicely, by the way, when we schedule things too, because let's say you had certain data sets for all 50 states. Well, you could add parameters and rerun your jobs for each state, right? So I could have it run for Florida and then do another iteration. And I'll show you what this looks like in the task UI, but you can have this run through iterations of your different states. You can have that all be automated, scheduled, and dynamic, right? So that's pretty cool. So I guess I'll just show you briefly real quick. So you can see here, you can schedule jobs from the notebook UI. So minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months. It's pretty flexible to what you need. If you needed a data set to run every hour, or maybe you had like a monthly report, you could have that scheduled at a certain time. You can pick your time zone, things like that. It's really up to you. So I guess if you're not allowed to launch your own compute clusters, you'll probably want to leverage, a cluster that's already on to be able to run your jobs. So maybe you just use your all-purpose clusters that are already turned on, and then you just have your jobs run against those clusters if you're not allowed to launch your own compute. And then you can also set alerts, right? Start, success, and failures. And everybody on that distro would get this, right? And then maybe you have start, success, and failure of this notebook running on that schedule, and everybody's always alerted every time it fails or succeeds or it's starting, etc., right? How do we do that, right? So Databricks makes it really easy to install libraries. These are notebook scope libraries, right? So it only apply to the particular notebook that you're using it in. But I have a really, really quick and dirty example of how you would do this, right? So I installed pip install matplotlib. I did another one here for NumPy. I already ran all these, right? And then I just ran, so I just stole this from online. But I just wanted to show you that, the art of the possible here. And it's pretty easy to use pip libraries if you want to install libraries. Now, having said that, I noticed somebody had a question about Databricks runtime, so I'll quickly show you something real quick. Let's do, what's the latest? 11. Okay, so 11.3 is actually the latest, one of the later runtimes, right? So if I click this runtime, the cool thing is these runtimes, the libraries that are included are all publicly, you can look up what libraries are in here. So even if you don't have access to create your own clusters, you can always Google the runtime of the compute cluster that you're using and look up what libraries are there. So you might not even need to add like a matplotlib or things like that. Some of those might already be included by default. So you can see here in this 11.3 runtime, I can see all the installed Python libraries, right? And you can see matplotlib inlines already installed, for example, right? So I'm just trying to show you what's in here, right? Some of the, and if you have like an ML cluster, right? So if I go back real quick, if you come in here, yeah. So you can see here the runtime information. So you can see this notebook's attached to this cluster. If I click the cluster dropdown, you can see the runtime DBR info. So this is the version number of Databricks runtime that you're using. So you would just quickly Google that, and you would see, you know, what libraries were installed if you even needed that library, or, you know, if you needed a different version of a particular library. Sometimes I know that that can be a thing too. All right, I think that was it for the notebook part. So let me see here. Was there any? Maybe I'll let everybody else answer the questions for me. I know that Tim and Arif are helping out there. So maybe I'll move on to Databricks SQL here. I think I still have about, what, 15, 20 minutes or so?
Yes, we have until 2:45 until the Q&A.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we should have plenty of time. I'm not trying to go too fast, but I'm trying to make sure we cover everything. So that's always a difficult balance. Cool. So here is the Databricks SQL UI, right? So you'll notice I've been operating in the data science and engineering UI. I click this drop down, I go to SQL, and now I'm in the Databricks SQL UI. So I think I mentioned, you know, kind of what this architecture looked like earlier, right? So you can see here, this kind of shows nicely the different personas, right? Like data engineering is where we were operating, and now we're kind of moving over to BI, SQL, and analytics. So this, you can see here, obviously I have some recent files. I created a query file, but I'll just show you real quick, you know, how do I navigate to queries, things like that. So we have something called like the SQL editor. And if I click that, you can see here, I've already connected the Hive Metastore on the default database within there. And you can see that there's a bunch of data sets within here. And I have this demo already ready to go where I found the data set we're going to use. But real quick, you know, if you wanted to, you could filter on here, for example. And if I click this, I just wanted to show you, you can view the schema information for your table. It's kind of nice. So that's pretty cool. And if you click that arrow, it actually inserts that value for you. So you don't have to kind of type it out. But yeah, and then let me see here. Some other things, right? So it's a little bit different in DB SQL. You have to make sure you're connected to what we call SQL warehouses. So yeah, so I think you guys are probably not going to have access to create these on your own, but it works really similarly to clusters, which is basically your compute power. You need to make sure your queries are attached to and running against these SQL warehouses. So if I go back to my query, right, you can see that I'm attached to Databricks Academy warehouse, right? And then you can see that there's a demo SQL one as well. There's a few different warehouses that I could use right now. So the important thing is the green check mark is on, and if you hover over it, it tells you it's running. So you can see here, I ran this query, right? I'm selecting everything from this default diamonds table. And you can see here that you could get the schema and that level of information that you could before if I did a display command, right? But I want to create a couple other queries too. So how do you do that? I'll show you in a second. Let's see here. So here I'm running with a limit of 1,000 right now. So this is really just a subset. If I wanted to, I can create a visualization, right? So maybe I'll come in here. Let's see, can I get something to show up here? There you go. So this is pretty messy, but I'm just trying to give you the idea of kind of how this works. I'm just going to save this for now, but essentially you can create different visualizations. You can create pie charts and line charts and things like that. Obviously, this isn't very pretty, but my point is you can create visualizations here in Databricks pretty easily. There's different types of visualizations, right? You have like bar charts and line charts and things like that. You can tell my BI background is not as extensive as maybe some other folks, but essentially you can create any chart that you want based off your data in here. So I'm just going to discard that. Let's see. I'm just going to say, I'm going to call this CSS Q visualization 1. And then maybe I'll create some other queries as well. So if I come in here, if I hit this, I can hit create new query. And then I'll just say CSS Q demo 2. And maybe I'll copy some of this code and I'll just run a slightly different query. Yeah.
The attributes for cut, or are those the attributes for clarity?
Maybe that's why. Yeah, it's capital. It's a capital first letter. All good. Yeah. So here you can see I did a select star from the table where cut equals good, right? I'm just trying to give you an idea of how this would work. And then these are really basic examples. And I could do something similar here. I'm going to create another query. And I'll call this one CSS Q demo 3. And then maybe I'll switch up. Let's see. We'll do color equals E. Yeah, cool. All right, so I'm going to save these queries, right? And I'm just going to show you some different options for them. So you can schedule queries just like jobs, right? You can have these run refreshing on 5-minute intervals or 10-minute intervals and things like that. And you can do this per query, which is kind of nice. So maybe some queries you need to run more frequently than others. You can also do this hourly or daily, weekly, and monthly, or things like that, right? So I'm just trying to give you an idea of how this would work. And then you can share things in DB SQL similarly. You could the way you could in the regular workspace or the data science and engineering workspace, right? I could share things with admins or users, right? And you can see here that it's manage, edit, run, and view. It's pretty similar permissions wise, and I'm going to just hit add. Some other things I wanted to show you real quick. Let's see here. Let's see what else I wanted to show you. Maybe I'll just add this to a dashboard now, just to give you an idea. And I actually have a pre-created dashboard from another demo too, so I can show you a really pretty one with a lot of good visualizations. But I just wanted to show you live, like kind of how you would use this and how this works, right? So I have these 3 demos. So maybe I'll create a dashboard now. I'll show you how this works. So let's say you have refresh data and you want to create a dashboard. So you would just navigate here to dashboard, you create a dashboard. We'll call this CSSQ demo. Let's save, right? And then I'm just going to hit add visualizations. So if I search CSSQ, you can see all of these are popping up, right? Oh, I haven't saved it yet. So maybe I should save this. This is not the right one. So this will be called CSSQ demo, and then demo 2 and demo 3. Cool. Okay. So you could create a new visualization based off this query, right? Like similarly in the same editor that I showed you earlier, or you can create an existing one, give it a title, and then just hit to add the dashboard, right? And you can see here that that'll add that. Once it loads, it'll add that that visualization here. So that might take a minute. Yeah. So you can see this visualization is not very pretty, but I'm just trying to give you the idea of how this works. If I wanted to, I can add. Yeah. So you can see here, there's different options, right? So for the last one, I just did results. I think I did visualization, but usually there's a results and a visualization. I didn't create a visualization for these other 2 queries, so I'm going to hit results this time, and you're actually going to see a table pop up, right? And you can adjust the size of these 2, right? So if something was related, right, I can drag and kind of adjust the size of these and make it all pretty. I can bring something above and below things. It's really flexible to how you want to create your dashboard of your visualizations. But the whole idea is it's really easy to create tables and visualizations of data and graphs, and you have it all in one place, right? So maybe if I go to CSSQ demo, yeah, you can see here. So I already have the chart from the first query, but I didn't do the results. So maybe I'll do that. I'll drag that one up here. So now, like this is how you would do something, right? Where I have, this is the visualization for that first query, right? So maybe I could create more visualizations and I could pair those queries those results to the visualizations, right? So if I hit done editing, now I'm no longer in edit mode. What's cool is you can hit refresh, and that'll actually pull in the latest data for these visualizations and queries. So it makes it really easy to update lots of different things at the same time in one view, right? So these are actually really 2 different queries, right? The top item, the visualization and the query are based off the same value, whereas the bottom one is a different query. But I could either let these queries run on the schedules that I had set here in this UI, right? Or I can manually come in here and refresh these. Now you can also schedule the whole dashboard to run at a certain interval as well. So it's super flexible for scheduling. I think scheduling probably works way easier in the BI tool in Databricks SQL. Candidly, I think because you just click a refresh button and then you just give it a time, and then there you go. So it's super easy to refresh visualizations and queries in DB SQL. Now, you can also add subscribers, right? So maybe somebody wanted to know every time this dashboard was updated. So maybe the project manager, or maybe there's a CMS government stakeholder that you report that wants this report, whenever it's updated, you can add them as a subscriber, and they'll get an email alert every time this dashboard is updated. And you could assign, similarly to query, you could assign a SQL warehouse, and you probably should make sure one's assigned by default to this dashboard. I'll show you real quick. I have a really pretty one that I've already created a while ago, which is why I didn't create a new one for this. I just wanted to give you an example. So this is one I created with some sales data, and you can see some of the different charts and information here. And you can see here, you can do maps, right? So I have certain data for sales for different states. So the state graph might be really useful for CMS, right? If there was certain, like I said, claims or healthcare related items that you're tracking per state, maybe use a map and kind of have like, this coloration where something is more dense or happens more often than other states, right? I think I kind of showed you results that work similarly. Here's a bar chart for this customer as well. You can see here some of the values there. So we really support different types of tables and charts. And like I said, all these capabilities are here for scheduling, refreshing, and things like that. And then lastly, you can create alerts as well. So if you wanted to be alert on certain values, so if you're constantly querying something, maybe you want to know if there's more than 100 claims for a state, for example, you can create an alert. So you can see here, I am referencing this query called Atom Total Red Alerts. So this is just an example, but I just wanted to show you how this works. So you just basically pick a target column, you pick a condition, and then you pick a threshold, and then you can add destination. You can see here, I can quickly, pick alert destinations for this and add people and things like that. And then those people will get alerted anytime, this alert was triggered. And I think there's different types of alerts that you can create too. So if I hit create an alert, let's see, hit CSSQ demo, right? Maybe I want to get alerted on the price. Maybe I want to know, maybe I'm ingesting public diamonds data and I want to know when the price drops down to less than $5,000, right? This is just an example. So then I could, I want to know each time this price drops down under these 5,000 and then default template's fine. And then I can refresh this, maybe I want to do this every 5 minutes. Like maybe I'm in the business of buying cheap diamonds and I can resell them at a higher value. So I can monitor a public data set. But this is just a pure hypothetical example, right? So maybe you want to monitor the prices of medication or something like that. And you have a medication column here and you want to know if the price is greater than a certain value for a certain entity, right? So you could do something similar like that. So just wanted to show you kind of how that works. All right. And then lastly, query history is really cool. So I know CMS is really big on security and auditing and things like that. So you can see here, who submitted, what queries and when. So this is really, really helpful. And there's kind of like a duration. If you want to see queries that have occurred for a really long amount of time and the different statuses, if you want to look at failed queries and things like that, or what's currently running. If you want to audit back, I don't know how far back this actually goes. It looks like we have this set to maybe not that far back. Yeah, so I can only go back to October 17th for our deployment. But yeah, and then you can hit refresh here. So that's probably the last thing I wanted to cover. I know I went really, really quickly. I was just trying to make sure I showed you guys everything because I didn't have a lot of time. So maybe at this point, we'll take a look at the questions and if there was anything else that you wanted me to cover, if there's anything else I missed or anything like that. But I think I tried to hit on a little bit of everything.
And Adam, I can actually jump in a little bit before we jump fully into the Q&A. Can just review some of the SaaS connectivity.
Sure. Do you want me to stop sharing? Do you want to share, Reeve? Or
Sure, I'll take over.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. And yeah, I know that was absolutely a whirlwind because it's a ton to cover. Believe it or not, there's a ton that we didn't cover. So really appreciate Adam going through all of that. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Arif Abdul Kareem. I am the solutions architect supporting all of CMS, including CCSQ. So I'll really be kind of your main point of contact from a technical standpoint. I also worked closely with Philip and team throughout the pilot. We'll continue to work closely with them, along with my colleague, Tim, who is our specialist solutions architect. You probably see him in the chat answering a ton of questions. What I wanted to quickly touch on was just how you would connect to Databricks from SaaS. And I think for those of you who are already using JDBC connections or the various different SaaS access interface for Hadoop, this is going to look pretty similar. But I want to just walk through it quickly and talk a little bit about the process. So in this case, a lot of this will be set up for you, by Philip and team, by the admin team. So including the Databricks URL, you'll need a PAT token, which is a personal access token. I'll show you how to generate that, and we'll use that for authentication. And then we'll need an HTTP path. And most of this, with the exception of the token, is going to be fixed. So the admin team can provide you with it, as well as in this case, I'm using a JDBC driver. So I'm just passing in the path to that JDBC driver. Again, I would expect a lot of that to be set up. And then it's, for those of you who are familiar with Proc SQL, I'm sure a lot of you use a lot of Proc SQL, whether to execute locally on SAS inside of your SAS VIA environment, or if you're using Proc SQL to push down into a database or to push down into Hadoop, it's going to be a similar process. So it should be very little that changes for those of you who are still working from a SAS interface. I do want to talk about, perhaps some best practices that you can start to adopt to just be a little bit more efficient. But I did want to just show you kind of that first level of just making sure that your code that's working today pointing to a Hadoop cluster is going to continue to work if you point it to Databricks. I think as you start to look at how do you optimize that code and how do you really take advantage of Databricks, which kind of in its essence, as Adam explained in the beginning, the whole idea of Databricks is to kind of minimize data movement and to give you a single platform where you can kind of do all of your workloads, right? So your data warehousing workloads, whether it's connecting and kind of pushing down SQL queries like we're doing here, or if you're doing data science and ML. So in that vein, we want to try to minimize, even when we're connecting from SAS, the amount of data movement so that we can perform as much of that work as possible. Then you add an execute statement, and then when you're finished, you'll disconnect. So really simple. The difference between implicit and explicit is that explicit forces you to use the database native syntax. In the case of Databricks, that's ANSI SQL. So as long as you're using ANSI SQL commands, it will get pushed down. If not, it will throw an error, unlike implicit SQL pass-through, which may be pulling a lot of data without you being aware of it. So I wanted to highlight that. And then I'm going to highlight one other thing, and then I'll show you kind of how you would get that PAT token, since a lot of this will be provided to you with the exception of the token itself. I just wanted to, again, kind of talking about best practices, particularly using Databricks along with SAS. One of the patterns that we try to encourage is that you do as much of that data curation in ETL. If you have, pipelines, or you have workflows where you're joining between data, you're doing a ton of transformation on the full data set, we typically would kind of recommend following like what we refer to as this medallion architecture, bronze, silver, gold, where we're kind of progressively curating our data. And we want to do as much of that as possible where the data lives on the lake, in your case in AWS and S3. And then what I would recommend and what I would encourage is that when you get to kind of your silver table, you then take maybe a subset or a filtered set of that data and produce a gold table that you'll analyze in SAS, as well as you can start to run your machine learning directly in Databricks notebooks, or using AutoML, which we didn't get a chance to go into today, or start doing some dashboarding or some SQL queries inside of Databricks SQL. So that would be the typical pattern, especially for those of you who are familiar with SQL code, either using explicit pass-through to do a lot of that curation in Databricks, but using SAS as your development interface, or if you're comfortable working in Databricks directly and you prefer the UI inside of Databricks, you do a lot of that data curation directly in Databricks, and then you can kind of push those final, maybe aggregated tables into SAS for additional analytics using specific procs that you may be familiar with. Last thing I'll show, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I do want to show how you would generate those PAT tokens. So if I'm inside of the Databricks home screen, as Adam was showing, I'm going to go ahead and go into my user settings. So if I click on my username here at the top, I'll go into my user settings, and then I'll click on access tokens, and I'll generate a new token. So you can see earlier I was testing this out. So here I'll just do SAS connection 2, and then you're going to give it a lifetime. It's typically a security best practice to try to rotate tokens often. I would defer to the admin team within CCSQ to kind of give you a best practice there. For the purposes of testing, I'm just going to set mine to 1 day. And this token, you have to make sure that you copy it because you won't be able to see it again, right? So we try to make that clear with this warning message. But this is that token that you saw inside of the libname statement here. So where we see my password, this is the PAT token that you'll take and you'll put inside of your lib name statement.
All right, so I think we're running out of time at this point, but special thanks to the Databricks team, to Philip, and to the data scientist who spoke during this session. The next session we will have is actually, again, with the CMS data scientists. We're going to be learning about what their role is within CCSQ. So let's go on a break for 4 minutes and we'll return and get that next session started.